Thanks for joining us again. Today we focus on the fact that Trevor Milton and Nikola went bankrupt in March of this year, and there were no buyers for their hydrogen trucks. There were buyers for their electric trucks. And so we decided to do a show today because there's an open question, is this the end of the idea of hydrogen trucks competing against electric vehicles as we enter the zero emission sort of EV space? This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Thanks once again for joining us. If this is your first time, welcome. If you're a repeat visitor, welcome back. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters. If you enjoy this show, like some better ideas on investing and trading, please join us on Patreon. And liking and subscribing and comments are also a big difference maker with our algorithms at Google. So today's show is, as our usual structure, about 5 minutes of discussion about what the news is, and then another 5 to 7 minutes of discussion of what the implications of this might be. So as you know, Nikola went out of business. They went bankrupt. And Trevor Milton, who created the company, went to jail for fraud. $34 billion was the amount of money, theoretically, that was lost in that situation. I have to say that my first point is that he actually built the product. They have customers. It didn't do as well as he expected, so I'm stunned that he had all the legal issues that were described, because it's one thing to not have a product, not sell anything. It's another thing to do so. Nonetheless, we wanted to review the fact today that, yes, the company went bankrupt, but the thrust of our show, as I said, was really focused on the issue of, well, if a bunch of companies and countries are looking at both electricity and hydrogen as two possible solutions to zero emissions, why is it they went under? 5 points. Number 1 point, how can you go under and not be able to sell vehicles when, in the case of Nikola, in this case, what they did was they partnered with a company called Iveco that's based in Italy, and Iveco, as a partner, was supporting them with both hydrogen and electric vehicles, which suggests that, well, wait a second, if you go bankrupt or there's a major issue, all you have to do is put those vehicles on a barge or ship and ship it back to Italy, and somebody else will buy it. So therefore, there should be a fairly large market for these vehicles. Concept number 2, the California Air Resources Board should be a rescue method for anybody looking at purchasing these vehicles. Why? Because right now, the California Resources Board, if you have a fleet and you want to purchase certain vehicles, you can use basically California Resources Board money to buy those vehicles. So in theory, people should be saying, wait a second, this is a great deal. I get free vehicles, and now I can take those vehicles, integrate them into my fleet, and make a great deal of money. The issue that's popping up with items number kind of 2 and 1 is cost of fuel. We reviewed the example of Toyota. They had a Mirai sort of fleet of vehicles being sold in Southern California that is a vehicle that uses hydrogen. And so when we looked at the numbers, the difference between the cost of the hydrogen to fuel those vehicles and the cost of electricity, let's say for a Model 3, was 3x. So it's 3 times the cost to use hydrogen as a solution. So this sort of answers the question as to why the electric version of the Nikola trucks are or being sold, etc., and why we're not getting buyers and we're going to auction on the hydrogen vehicles. Um, Item number 4. If you buy these vehicles, where are you going to get the hydrogen to power your fleet? Yes, there does exist locations to do so, but if you want to charge up using electricity, you have all kinds of flexibility in terms of how and where you could get that electricity, and you do not have that flexibility when it comes to hydrogen. So therefore, you have a very restricted area that these can operate successfully, or you can plan on waiting for several years until the built-out facilities might happen, and therefore you could use those vehicles. 5. Interchangeable parts. There is definitely obviously a difference between hydrogen and electric, but body panels on the exterior, etc. There are ways these vehicles can be used, so I do not expect them to go to zero when it comes to the auction. I just think the price that they go out at will be really low, because there's a lot of parts there, be it parts of the drivetrain, tires, doors, glass. There's a bunch of parts that can be used for other vehicles within the Iveco network, and theoretically you could parts out those vehicles and simply ship it into the supply chain of parts for Iveco. Primarily in Europe is where they operate, but they are a global company and they have customers in a lot of different places. So I particularly am moving on to half number 2 of this show, was focused on this issue because there's a whole bunch of people, including myself, that have been waiting on, well, who's going to win the battle? Is it going to be a battle that's won by electric or hydrogen? As you know, Elon famously called the hydrogen fuel cell. Why? Because by the time you expend all the energy to create the hydrogen, you might as well just go electric, because it's just overall a lot less costly. So as a result, it looks like Elon is right again. The hydrogen is just a bad way to go. Will Daimler and any of the other companies that are making a push because they have some competitive advantages in hydrogen they do not when it comes to electric? I'd say that's entirely possible. I would say, though, that based on what we're seeing right now, everything is suggesting that the hydrogen option has turned out to not be viable, and therefore nobody wants to commit to that for a whole bunch of reasons, but the cost component of it, I think, is the biggest driver for this whole thing. Now, could we see a major, we didn't expect this to happen? I suppose we could have governments to target very tight spaces where they want these vehicles to operate, and they're going to put their money in. But even if you build out a network of charging stations that you can get the hydrogen from, you still have the problem of somebody has got to create the hydrogen, safely transport it to these locations. And it's a lot easier to move power through high-powered lines than it is to move hydrogen, because there are all kinds of issues relative to it potentially blowing up, etc. So it's a very difficult product to work with. So is this the true demise of hydrogen as a solution? I don't think so. I think there are a number of entities that are still going to try. There's some Japanese companies, I believe Toyota and others, that keep making this effort. But the nightmare that I see going on is that when you're 3 times the cost of the electric solution and probably at least double, if not triple, the cost of regular diesel, I just don't see how this is going to work out successfully going forward. I'm actually really looking forward to if any of you have any comments on this relative to, do you think there's a silver lining that we don't see that is not working out, and why people are ducking these in large numbers? So finally, we'd like to move on and just say, I don't think the hydrogen is going to happen. I think electric is how zero emissions is going to move forward into the future. But stay tuned, there may be something new, propane, natural gas, something that comes out that we didn't expect, but we look forward to seeing what that might be. So finally, I'd like to remind you of your health tips for the day. Just want to encourage you, don't forget your 25 leg lifts a day. A 20-minute walk will be hugely beneficial to a lot of components. Also wanted to encourage you to don't forget, prior to lovemaking, at least have a salad, but not a full-blown meal. Once again, we want to thank you for joining us. This is Greg for Teslafaninsight. Tschüss, au revoir, lehiprohut, hodahafes, draziche, nihama, namaste, arrivederci. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day, and bye for now.